Of course, I have a strong point of view on this, and it's the same as Lawrence, so we thought it was only right that we get someone to put the Israeli point of view, and who better than Lorna Fitzsimmons, who joins me now on the line. Lorna, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, George. How are you?
I won't tell anyone of our former friendship if you won't. Now, you're supposedly an independent organisation, so the first question...
We are an independent organisation.
Well, let me give you a chance to demonstrate it. If Benjamin Netanyahu becomes the Prime Minister of Israel in a few weeks' time, or in February, will you still be stoutly defending Israel?
Yeah, we defend Israel as a democracy, and as you know, I was proudly British, or not that proudly, but certainly supported our democracy throughout our history when we have had leaders that we both have actively campaigned to get rid of. The question is supporting Israel's right to exist and not pretending that Israel is a perfect democracy, but it is a democracy. And if you look at history, it's actually been some of the right-wing leaders in history, not just in Israel, but throughout the world, that have made the most remarkable peace initiatives. And certainly it is true. If you look at the peace with Egypt, it was done by one of the most right-wing leaders Israel's ever had. So although, on the face of it, I know that people think that somebody coming from the right is not good news for peace, actually, if you look at some of the most momentous peace deals that have been done, and as I say, I refer back to Sadat and Egypt, they were done by the right in Israel. So,
that's not what the President of Israel was saying in Britain this week. He's terrified. He's terrified of Netanyahu becoming the Prime Minister.
It's actually not. I was actually with him for a large part of his visit, and as you know, having spent a long time in the Labour tradition, that obviously before he became President, that for the vast majority of his life, Peres has been a doughty Labour man and a peace campaigner all his life, and hence his Nobel Peace Prize. And he is saying, look, he's saying that he's known Bibi all his life. He's known Bibi's family all his life. And actually, Bibi has never, ever ruled out the two-state solution. And actually, the truth is that at Taba, when he was Prime Minister, after he'd won, after Labour lost just after the Camp David 2000 talks, actually he himself accepted the Clinton parameters. I mean, the thing to really acknowledge here is that there is an ongoing peace process now, regardless of what people think of the chances of it succeeding or whatever. For the past year, both the Palestinian leadership and the government of Israel have been in the most detailed ever negotiations that they have ever engaged in, going through some of the most intractable issues that have faced both peoples in the last 60 years. So that there is a process, and Israel has shown its ability to give up land. As I said, the far right did it in terms of the peace process they did with Egypt, and even Ariel Sharon did it, and I know what you think of Ariel Sharon and lots of people, but he gave up Gaza totally and utterly. His analysis was that Israel could not get peace with its neighbours and permanent security by governing the Palestinians.
Well, you say that...
Therefore, he extricated Israel in a very, very bloody way, getting rid of 30 settlements. It was a very, very hard thing for an Israeli leader to do, but he did it.
Well, you say they left Gaza, but of course they've incarcerated 1.5 million Gazans instead.
Well, they haven't, and I must admit I was very troubled by Lauren's, the using of the word concentration camp, etc. The truth is that when actually Israel evacuated totally and utterly Gaza, gave it back to the Palestinians to run, it was not blockaded at all, and indeed on the table was a huge amounts of money and help in actually building an international port and an airport. And it was only because that the people in Gaza, predominantly Hamas at the time and then now definitely governed by Hamas, actually refused to relinquish terror. So you can imagine, you're a politician, it'd be the same in this country. Imagine that we, sort of Wales wanted independence, we gave them independence, and then they still started lobbing bombs over the marshes. People in Britain, England would be a bit pissed off, and and that's what happened.
Well, what we wouldn't do, though, Lorna, is starve the entirety of the Welsh population, because that would be something called collective punishment. Now, you don't like the word concentration camp, though that's what it looks like to most ordinary mortals. Let's try this one for size. Collective punishments were regularly practiced by the Nazi occupation forces in occupied Europe. They didn't care if they got the person who actually carried out the attack on the Nazi occupiers. They just punished everybody in the village or the town to make sure. That's what Israel's doing now, isn't it?
What Israel's doing is trying to stop a humanitarian disaster not of its own creating. It did not give away Gaza expecting that therefore it would still get thousands of pounds of munitions rained on its innocent citizens' heads, which has happened since they gave up Gaza. They still deliver a huge amount of aid, electricity, you name it, in terms of hospitals, etc. And Israel gets all the blame, and yet there are two borders. It was mentioned briefly by Lauren, but Egypt have soundly and resolutely kept their border a damn sight more shut than Israel has, and yet Egypt hasn't been attacked.
Well, it's doing so under Israeli orders.
And therefore one should ask yourself the question why. And it's because of Hamas. It's because they have refused to relinquish terror. You look at the brutal way they captured power over the PA within Gaza themselves. She referred to why children don't go outside. Actually, a lot of the reason that children don't go outside in Gaza is because of the violence in Gaza, which is Palestinian on Palestinian, and absolutely nothing to do with the Israelis.
Well, we've established that you're on first-name terms with Mr. Netanyahu, Bibi you call him, and we've now established that you're a big supporter of the Hosni Mubarak dictatorship, 99.9% of the vote in Egypt. You're not so keen, though, on the people who won the election, which was the only free and fair election ever held in any Arab country, ever. Lorna?
It's not the only election that was ever held in every... but the point...
That's a very interesting revelation. Tell me one other free and fair election in the Arab world, ever, anywhere.
No, George, you would be the first to say that democracy is more than a vote, and that actually terror and running terror campaigns is actually inimical with democracy. And when you decide to step up and represent your people, you have to relinquish being a guerrilla movement, being a militia, and that is what Hamas have not done. There were riches galore waiting for Hamas to be able to therefore liberate their own people, prove that they were a more competent government than Fatah, and yet they refused to accept them, and they therefore put their people in an invidious situation. And that's why Egypt are not unlocking the border very readily, because they don't want the importing of that form of mentality, that they've got their own domestic political problems, and it's because they are still unable to relinquish that bond with terror. They still haven't acknowledged Israel's right to exist. Hence, they're still trying to actually attack Israel. And they're still, even with the ceasefire, planning terror attacks. And yet Israel is still abiding by the ceasefire.
Oh, my goodness. We don't have time to go into the extent of the falseness of that last assertion. And as I've said, the Egyptian people will, I'm sure, be mightily proud of the endorsement of their government by the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre. Let me ask you one last question, if I may. How come everyone sees it so very differently to you? How come, in particular, the United Nations is on a virtually on a weekly basis condemning the collective punishment involved in this siege?
The United Nations is also condemning the violence and the unprovoked violence on innocent people in Israel as well, George, as you well know.
But there's a ceasefire, as you've just acknowledged. So, despite there being a ceasefire, the United Nations is condemning on a weekly basis, in fact, twice weekly last week, the siege on Gaza, which is causing such widespread suffering. Why would the United Nations do that? Are they terrorists too?
No, and what the United Nations acknowledges that actually they have a huge problem because of actually the unprovoked terror that is still coming from Gaza into Israel.
But there's a ceasefire. You just acknowledged that.
So there are tons and tons.
Lorna, you just acknowledged there was a ceasefire.
Yeah, but there are still rockets going across.
No, there's a ceasefire. You just acknowledged that. Don't reinvent your contribution now. You acknowledge that there's a ceasefire, and yet the siege is going
on a daily basis.
Well, no, if it's being broken, it's being broken by the Israeli side. Anyway, we've had 9 minutes and 10 seconds of Lorna Fitzsimmons, which is longer than we gave Lauren Booth, so I think I've discharged my responsibilities. That was Lorna Fitzsimmons, the Chief Executive Officer of the Britain-Israel Communication and Research Centre, putting the Israeli point of view on behalf of BB's government to come.